Why the heck is Eden Zero so dark? I mean, it's not that dark right away, but it gets heavy pretty quickly. First, it's the hashtag tragic backstories, which if you're a One Piece fan shouldn't be anything new, but then you start to see how some of these characters die and you're just sitting there like, oh my god. And that's part of why so many people enjoy following this manga, because Mashima isn't afraid to break the characters and put them through these horrifying experiences. But at some point you stop and think, why does Mashima make the story so dark? Well, in this video, I'm going to answer that exact question and explain why Eden Zero needs to be as dark as it is. Be warned that this will contain spoilers. Before I get started, make sure to comment with your thoughts on why Eden Zero is so dark. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week in the next video. This week's comment goes to Flappo, who said that their favorite shonen protagonist is Mob from Mob Psycho 100. If you'd like more Eden Zero and other manga discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. Now let's just go ahead and start by stating the obvious. One big reason why Mashima places these gruesome deaths and traumatizing scenes in the story is because it creates tension. I mean, just look at Witch. The second that panel leaked of our girl literally in pieces, fans on Twitter and Reddit started freaking out. But, you know, in a good way. Because it's one thing to just kill off characters left and right as a substitute for actual plot. But it's another thing to create scenes like this that give us a legitimate investment in the story. In this case, fans are still on the edge of their seats, dying to find out whether Witch will end up okay. And there's also plenty of examples where, instead of aiming for suspense, Mashima builds tension by showing us some of the messed up stuff these villains have done to other characters. We all know Shura is obviously, well, a dick, but I don't think anyone's forgotten just how cruel Draken Joe was. And it's because of all the cruel stuff he did, like, gee, I don't know, executing the main character in front of his friends, that made us all go, man, I really hope they punch this guy in the face. So by creating these kinds of dark scenes, Mashima manages to build tension and suspense in a way that gets us deeply invested in the story. But you know, at this point you might argue that none of this is actually necessary. Like, you might agree with everything I've said so far and still say something like, look, we all love dark anime. Obviously, as an elite, I love Devilman Crybaby and Evangelion and totally didn't get those opinions from the internet. But Eden Zero would be fine if it wasn't this dark. And that, dear viewer, is just a flaming bag of gobbledygook. Cap, as the kids would say these days. There are several elements of Eden Zero that make it so that, if we didn't have those darker moments, the story would be straight up pointless. For starters, just look at Rebecca's time leap ability. I don't know about you, but as soon as Draken Joe executed Shiki, my immediate thought was, okay, so we're going back in time, right? I don't care who you are, we all have enough common sense to understand that this wasn't going to be the way things ended. And this is a perfect example of the direct relationship between the story's dark tone and the use of time leap as a plot device. There needs to be this safety net because of how terrifying things might play out, but there also needs to be these kinds of fatal consequences so that the time leap can serve a real purpose. If Mashima never bothered to kill off characters or rip off their limbs, then the most Rebecca would be doing is using her time leap to cheat at a card game while she calls out her opponent for cheating at a card game. Look, that's not the point. The point is, Mashima has this tool in the story. So there's a real need to create circumstances where that tool can actually be useful. Otherwise, why make such a fuss about it in the first place? Now, that's just one element of the story where we need that dark tone. And while I'm sure there's other examples we can all think of, there's one element where that dark tone is absolutely essential. It also happens to be one of the most universal themes in the story. This is the theme of corruption. From the very beginning, the world of Eden Zero is introduced as one that is full of corruption, both in the common use of the word and the less common use. The robots of Granbell are corrupt in the sense that they suddenly go all Terminator on Shiki, and they're also corrupt in the sense that they're just old and can't fix themselves anymore. This dual understanding of corruption doesn't stop at Granbell, as it's something that seems to be present wherever the characters go. Between all the chronophages plaguing the cosmos, the planets that have fallen to organized crime, and the androids who could fall apart or fall victim to malware at any given moment, it'd be easier to name the instances where corruption hasn't influenced the story. So with corruption being as present in Eden Zero as fan service is in Fire Force, not a jab at Fire Force by the way, I freaking love that show, it's only natural that the plot and characters would be as dark as the world they inhabit. I mean, with practically everyone and everything dying around you, the odds of the characters just always being chill and nothing bad ever happening are kinda slim. Actually, characters are another element of the story where this dark tone is essential. Like I mentioned before, chronophages are a big threat in this universe. One of the consequences of chronophages is that it can lead to two versions of the same character. Obviously, we know this because of Wise. And when it comes to characters and alternate timelines, we need that dark tone in order to distinguish the different versions of the character. In the case of Wise, the moment when he loses his mother's pendant ends up defining his character. The older Wise lost his arm and his pendant because he didn't trust his friend. When our Wise learns about this from our Sabir, it gives him a new appreciation for the friends he's made on the Eden Zero. Without that tragic backstory in both timelines, well, technically the same timeline, just two versions, there'd really be no meaningful way to contrast the two versions of Wise. In other words, the whole deal about having two versions of the same planet would kinda be pointless. And this is something we've also seen with Rebecca's time leap. Besides what we already talked about, there's the couple of scenes where Rebecca sees what happens in other timelines when things go horribly wrong, except for Shiki turning into an absolute snack. That part, apparently like future Shiki, is very cool, but it just serves as another example of the need for a dark tone in these timelines. Whenever Rebecca makes these unconscious leaps, it serves as a warning with fatal consequences. If we didn't have Rebecca losing quite arguably the most important ability in the story, or pretty much all of her friends dying, then what would be the point of even showing these timelines? So obviously we need the dark tone for the characters when it comes to all the different worlds and time travel mumbo jumbo. But even when we aren't traveling through parallel planets and universes, the dark tone is still essential in terms of character development and growth. Like I said, this is a corrupt world. As we've already discussed, this leads to some pretty tragic character development. But we need that tragic development because if the characters didn't have to go through some kind of trauma when everyone else in the story is going through hell, then our main cast would seem painfully dull by comparison. Take Hermit, for example. Hermit, like many androids, is a victim of human discrimination. Pretty messed up discrimination at that. It's only by overcoming that trauma and realizing it's okay to let her guard down that we get to see how sweet and kind she really is. Of course, she was only able to do this with the help of her friends, but by growing past this overwhelming trauma when it was so easy for her to continue on the way she was all by herself, Hermit is able to stand out as a truly unique character. And this is pretty similar to what happens with Homura. She spends all this time looking for her mother, then finds out that the only person who cared for her died trying to rescue that mother. Of course, Homura is absolutely devastated that her mentor is dead and there's nothing she can do about it. She even tells Shiki, "I don't think I'll ever recover from this." It was so easy for her to just give in like she said she was going to. In fact, she literally could have sat there and done nothing because of the paralyzers. But instead, she listens to her friends, wins her fight when she can barely even move, and decides to keep living for the future. Without that tragic backstory, Homura is just a cool samurai girl who can also be pretty goofy. But with it, Homura stands out as someone who values her friends because she knows how painful it is to lose them. And this is why it's crucial that our main cast have these dark moments in their life. The characters are only as compelling as they are because they live in this corrupt world, because they've had to face insane adversity, but still choose to live for a better future. Now, this is all the more important when we talk about Shiki and the use of Magimek. As Xenolith explains, users of the Gravity Ether Gear are susceptible to dark gravity and falling into the abyss. Essentially, if they allow their emotions to get the better of them, then they fall into the darkness like Ziggy, which is cool if you want to look like an absolute freaking badass, but not so cool if you don't want to be an absolute dick. And that's what Shiki is fighting to avoid. Naturally, this means that we need plenty of dark moments that test Shiki and show that he can overcome the abyss of his own heart. So when we see Shiki forced to fight robots who don't even want to fight him, or watch him have his eyeball force crushed by Shark Boy's goth cousin, it's because Shiki is being put to the test. A test that should ultimately make him a much more compelling protagonist. So at this point, it should be pretty clear why Eden Zero has such a dark tone. Not only does this dark tone help to build up hype and tension, but it also gives us the incredible setting and beautiful characters we've all come to love. And that's it for this discussion. If you enjoyed this discussion, then make sure to like the video. Also make sure to comment with your thoughts down below. And if you'd like more Eden Zero and other manga discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.